Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this last part of our Shin Megami Tensei retrospective. Today we're going through the remaining games in the series that I haven't covered in the previous videos, which are mostly divided into two categories, either portable games or strategy RPGs, and some of them fit in both of those categories. So let's get right into it. When fans in North America think about strategy RPGs in the Shin Megami Tensei series, Devil Survivor is the first thing that comes to mind. And actually it's the only one I knew about until I started researching for this episode, and then I came across the Majin Tensei series. So this is the first game, Majin Tensei, released for the Super Famicom in 1994. This is a top-down strategy RPG or tactics game, if that's what you want to call it, that takes place in the Shin Megami Tensei universe. In the game, you control a party made up of demons and humans to fight battles against other demons. The game is considered to have some of the best-looking tactics battle sequences on the SNES, but it's known for not having a very great story. The next year, we got Majin Tensei 2, which tried to remedy that. The story is much more involved. The gameplay is similar, except this time, instead of a top-down view, the game uses an isometric view, so it changes up the way the game looks and plays quite a bit, even though it's still just a standard tactics game. Even though the plot is more involved, this one still just involves demons attacking Tokyo, so it's that traditional modern-day Shin Megami Tensei storyline. The third game in the series was released for the Sega Saturn in Japan only, and it is called Ronda, and it's actually pretty notable for perhaps being the worst game in the Shin Megami Tensei series. There's a bit of a story around this game in that when a demo was released in Japan, people who played it were so disappointed they ran out and canceled their pre-orders, and it was such a high amount of pre-orders that were canceled, it was hard to avoid. So the game is notable for its terrible graphic story and gameplay, so it's pretty surprising for Shin Megami Tensei. You know, most people, if they don't like it, it's just not their thing, but to be a flat-out bad game is a shock in this series. So the game revolves around an Aztec demon who's trying to be revived, and he starts off in cyberspace, but eventually he ends up in Tokyo and captures the main character's brother, who goes out to save him. All three of these Majin Tensei games never came out over here. They're never released in English, so I look forward to doing some Let's Plays of them when I have some time. The next series I want to talk about is probably one of the biggest in the Shin Megami Tensei universe, and one that not a lot of people know about. It is called the Last Bible series, and it was mostly released on portable devices. In Japan, the first game was called Megami Tensei Gaiden Last Bible, showing that it's a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series. Many of the games in the series were developed by different developers, but they were all published by Atlus. The idea behind this series was to release a toned-down version of the games, so games that don't quite go into all the demon stuff, instead they're called monsters in the game, and it was designed to appeal to kids a bit more. The games take place in a fantasy setting. It's kind of a mashup between Dragon Quest and Ancient Jerusalem, which kind of fits that Last Bible title. In the world of Grenache, where the game takes place, there was once a war between humans and demons. Afterwards, the demon left for their own world, and the humans and demons have lived separately ever since. In this world, humans can study Gaia, which gives them the power of the gods, so they can use the special attacks and magic spells, so they can use abilities like teleportation or telekinesis by studying this art. The gameplay is pretty consistent with the rest of the Shin Megami Tensei series, so it's a turn-based RPG, and you can talk to monsters to recruit them. Even though the series is pretty unknown over here, and most of the games didn't come out in English, the first one actually did. It came out for the Game Boy Color as Revelations the Demon Slayer, and the Revelations name might ring a bell if you watched my Persona episode, because the first game in the Shin Megami Tensei series to be released over here, well, other than Jak Brothers, Persona was released under the Revelations title, so I think that was the name they were going for to brand the Shin Megami Tensei series before they just decided to just go with Shin Megami Tensei. This game stars the main character L, who travels the world to discover why monsters have been attacking. He has to defeat the Gaia gods who control these monsters and set things right. The game was originally released for the Game Boy, and an updated version with improved graphics was released for the Game Gear. The Game Boy Color version came later, and that included a couple more updates. Following Revelations was Last Bible 2, which was originally released for the Game Boy in Japan, but was also updated and released on the Game Boy Color. This game stars the character Yuri, who was born in the Demon Kingdom, and is sent out by the Demon King to stop the return of an evil demon named Gyrus. Last Bible 3 follows that, and in a break from tradition, it was released on the Super Famicom, and it's the only game in the series not to be released on a portable system. The game stars the character Ciel, who leaves his hometown to fulfill a prophecy by defeating a great evil. Because of the upgraded power of the Super Famicom, the game featured new gameplay mechanics to let the player level up their monsters. In previous games, you could only fuse them to get new, stronger monsters, so this was a welcome addition. The next game in the Last Bible series was released in 1995 in Japan only as well, and it was called Another Bible. This game breaks from the previous 3 games because it is a tactics RPG similar to the Majin Tensei series. The game stars the main character Casael, who leaves his hometown after his parents are killed. Along the way, he meets up with a princess, and the two of them set off to save the world. The last game in this first Last Bible series is actually a pretty surprising one. It's entitled Megami Tensei Gaiden Last Bible Special and was released for the Game Gear in 1995. What makes it unique is that it was developed by Sega, and it doesn't seem to fit in with any of the previous games. It also features a first-person dungeon crawling kind of gameplay, something like the dungeon crawling of the earlier Shin Megami Tensei games. In the game, the Demon King Gyrias has captured the city of Jerusalem, and the main character Matal sets off to build a party, venture into the dungeons, and defeat the Demon King. Much later, 3 more Last Bible games were released for mobile devices. These were entitled Last Bible: The New Testament. All 3 games are traditional RPGs, but they take place in a different world in which monsters and humans now live together. In the first game, the main character Rui sets out with his friends to defeat the Demon Lord. The second game was a prequel to the first one, and it was twice as big. It features a much more complex story where a king summons monsters to keep the citizens under control. The main character and his friends set out to defeat the king and his commanders. The third game, Last Bible New Testament 3, is a continuation of the story from the first game. That brings us to the next series, which is probably just as big as the Last Bible series in terms of the number of games that came out, but just like Last Bible, very few of them came out over here, so I think it takes up the least amount of space on this table, and that is Devil Children. Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children is a series of games that was designed to capitalize on the success of Pokemon. Now, while a lot of games are doing it at this time, I give Shin Megami Tensei a little more credit than those other titles because the original Shin Megami Tensei games started a lot of the ideas that Pokemon would go on to make popular later. The first 2 games in the series were Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children Red Book and Black Book. Both were released on November 17, 2000. Unlike Pokemon, where both versions were very similar, just featuring a couple minor differences, these are actually 2 completely different games. While they share the same world, you play a different main character and the story is completely different in each game. Also, like Last Bible, the series has been toned down so it appeals to kids. You still collect demons and have them fight for you, but you don't do any of the fighting yourself as the main character. Most of the demons are also cute, chibi-like versions, so they appeal to kids. You don't get the crazy, weird, horrific, sexy-looking ones that you might see in the other Shin Megami Tensei games. Also, like the earlier Last Bible games, they don't level up, so you have to fuse them to make new demons in order to get stronger monsters. The series is called Devil Children because the main characters in each of the games are actually half human, half demon kids. Red Book stars the character Mirai, who's looking for her lost father, and the Black Book stars Setsuna, whose little brother is kidnapped by demons and taken to the demon world. An updated remake of the game was released for the PlayStation entitled Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children Red and Black Book. This PlayStation game included updates of both games on a single disc. The games included updated graphics, new opening cutscenes based on an anime, voiceover work, and new monsters. In Japan, the series was fairly popular, and eventually had a manga, anime, and collectible card game. But since the overall SMT series was barely known in North America, and it could be a tricky thing to localize for a Western audience, we never got those games over here. The original manga release adapted the stories from Red and Black Book and was told in 5 volumes. The anime was based on Red and Black Book as well, and it combines both of those stories for a 50-episode run. The trading card game went for 7 sets. 5 were based on the games and 2 were based on the anime. There was almost 1,000 cards in it. In 2001, the first sequel, White Book, was released. The game takes place years after the events of Red and Black Book, and stars the main character Masaki, who gets caught up in the events involving a quiet kid named Takaru. The next set of games in the series are ones you may have actually heard of, and those are those 2 right here, which are DemiKids Light Version and Dark Version, or in Japan, Devil Children, Book of Light, and Book of Dark. These are the only games in the series that have come out in English. Like Red Book and Black Book, Both of these games feature a completely different story and different characters, but they take place in the same world. Sometimes those story paths cross, but for the most part they're completely different. In these games, the main characters discover that they're half demons, and they find a book that allows them to summon demons, but when they open the portals, demons start to flood into the world and they have to fight them back. In light version, the main character Jin is sucked into Valhalla, where he joins a resistance group fighting against the demons. In the dark version, the main character Akira is tasked by Lucifer to close the portals. Like the previous games, these also got manga and anime adaptions. The manga went for 3 volumes and the anime went for 52 episodes. A third set of games was released in the series entitled Devil Children Book of Fire and Book of Ice. In these games, twin towers appear on Earth as it begins to get attacked by demons. The characters of the previous games return to help fight back the demons. Book of Fire sees Jin return, while Book of Ice has Akira come back. The Devil Children series also had a bunch of spin-offs which also never came out over here. These include a card battling game for the Game Boy Color called Devil Children Card Summoner, Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children Puzzle de Call, which is a box-pushing puzzle game for the Game Boy Advance. The game features a story mode that brings characters from Light and Dark Book together, and you can hatch demons in it to perform different abilities to help get through the puzzles. There's also boss fights in it, which is a pretty interesting idea for a puzzle game. The next one was a real-time strategy game called Shin Megami Tensei Devil Children Messiah Riser, in which you send out your army of demons to combat other demons. Finally, in 2011, a social RPG was released on the GREE mobile network in Japan. This game was just called Devil Children Mobile and takes place in the Devil Children universe. And that brings us to the last big series here, which is Devil Survivor, and one that if you're a fan of Shin Megami Tensei, you've definitely heard about. Even though the series has really only had 2 games, both of them came out over here twice, and we had a lot of surrounding media. So let's get right into it with the first release, Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor for the DS. Now, this was a really cool take on a strategy RPG. You play a group of kids who are trapped in Shibuya after demons attack and the military locks down the zone. You have these comps that they're kind of these DS looking computers which predict the future and allow you to summon demons to fight back. The combat is really interesting. You make groups that are formed of 1 human and 2 demons, and those groups, you move them around like a traditional strategy RPG, but when you get into combat, each round plays out like a traditional turn-based RPG combat. The game takes place over 7 days and features branching story paths. Shortly after the release of that game, the 3DS was out, and so we got an updated version for that entitled Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor Overclocked. Now, this added quite a few interesting features. Most importantly, it added a new 8th day scenario, so a new kind of epilogue to the game. It also added a demon compendium which you could use to summon back demons you've gotten rid of, which made it just a lot easier. Speaking of easier, it added in different difficulty modes, which is welcome because the game is really hard. And finally, it featured full voice acting. The first game in the series had a manga adaptation, which only recently finished coming out over here. The manga adaptation went for 8 volumes and tries to adapt the branching paths of the game to a single story, and it's actually a really great read. We also got this art book, which is a great surprise. Udon puts out amazing art books for games and animes, and this one just comes with a ton of content about the game. Like these different information pages about all of the demons, and just cool stuff. For a game that, wasn't really that popular, I'm surprised we got something like this. We didn't get it for really many of the other Shin Megami Tensei games, so it's always welcome to get cool stuff like that. That brings us to Devil Survivor 2, which I still have sealed because it was so soon after Overclocked came out that this was released that I assumed Overclocked 2 would be coming out, and I was wrong. It actually took quite a while for an updated version to come out. Long enough that I started to think that they wouldn't do it. This game is a completely different story. It has no ties to the first game that I'm aware of. In this game, a group of invaders called the Septentrions attack Earth, and the main character joins a group of people who have made deals with the devils in order to fight these invaders. Throughout the game, the players get these death clips on their phone that can show which characters are going to die next, so they can try to avoid those fates. The gameplay is very similar to the first game, but it does feature some of the enhancements that came in Overclocked. It also introduces a fate system, which is something like Persona's social links. So the more you kind of hang out with people, the better they are at combat. The follow-up did eventually come out. It is called Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker, and it features full voice acting like Overclocked, as well as another extra chapter. So it's basically the extra features that the original Devil Survivor 2 didn't already take from Overclock have now been included in this one. This release also comes with a 4-track CD soundtrack and a couple of decals of the different characters and stuff. So some pretty interesting decals there. Just like the first Devil Survivor, a ton of extra stuff was released, starting with a side story mobile game. In Japan, a card battling mobile game was released entitled Devil Survivor 2 The Extra World. The series also saw 2 manga adaptations. The first one, Devil Survivor 2 Show Your Free Will, was serialized in a manga magazine in Japan and shows the story from a different character's point of view. There was an anime which did come out in English. It was released on a DVD as well as Blu-ray, and that contains 13 episodes which retell the story from the game. The second manga series also didn't come out over here, and it's just an adaptation of the anime entitled Devil Survivor 2 The Animation. That stuff really bugs me. A couple things have been doing that recently, like Danganronpa, and I don't know why you wouldn't just adapt the original source material. Finally, Japan only again, a light novel was released entitled Devil Survivor 2 The Animation Cetus's Prequel. So that tells the backstory of that character. And that's it for the Devil Survivor series. That brings us to the last game in the whole retrospectives, and funnily enough, it is the first Shin Megami Tensei game to ever come out over here, long before most of us even knew what Shin Megami Tensei was, and that is Jak Brothers for the Virtual Boy. Now, if you're a collector like me who is trying to go after all of the Shin Megami Tensei games that have come out in English, this is probably the one that's eluded you. It is a very hard to find game. It is the rarest game on the Virtual Boy, and I just got lucky finding it. So it's a really cool game. It is nothing like Shin Megami Tensei. It is a interesting action maze game where you have to guide Jack Frost and his 2 brothers through these 6 mazes in order to get back to the demon world after spending too much time on Earth for Halloween. They have an hour to get back before the portal to the demon world closes. So it's just a fun little maze game that is worth checking out. I mean, it might not be worth getting a Virtual Boy and trying to track it down for unless you're a real hardcore Shin Megami Tensei fan, but it's definitely an interesting oddity. So thanks for checking out my Shin Megami Tensei retrospective. I hope you checked out all the parts. There's a lot of games you might not know about. I didn't know about some of these games before I started, and I look forward to doing Let's Plays of some of these games. I have some other series retrospectives coming up, so stay tuned for those, and I'll see you later. Bye.